Oda trying to tell us that SHAKKY is Shanks' mother? Okay, Pirate Pals, we have to discuss this because chapter 1157 was jam-packed, lots of surprising lore. The juiciest, of course, being that SHAKKY may be the Helen of Troy, the face that launched 1,000 simps. And I did discuss my thoughts on that already, but I promised you to unpack the rest of chapter 1157 because I have a lot more thoughts on all the other reveals that we got in this chapter. But a thought that I didn't even have until I started reading everyone's comments was, could it be that SHAKKY is Shanks' mum? Oda was obviously giving us a lot of suggestive hints that SHAKKY was the treasure of Hachinosu. The same very treasure or the crown jewel that was said to have been stolen from Hachinosu and taken to God Valley, the treasure that the Rocks Pirates came to retrieve as we saw in chapter 1096. And then we have to start connecting the information that we already know. The major one being that Shanks was found as a baby in a treasure box that was looted from God Valley by the Roger Pirates. And as many of you pointed out to me, this may mean that Shanks is actually SHAKKY's son. We have actually seen something quite similar through Kuma's flashback about Ginny. We know that Ginny was forced to become the 8th wife of some celestial dragon, was impregnated, and that's how Bonnie was born. So we have to ask, did the same thing happen with SHAKKY? But this time, that celestial dragon in question was Figureland Garling. Garling may have fallen in love or in lust with SHAKKY, stole her, and that's how Shanks and Shamrock were born. I've even seen some comments suggest that's why Garling was so gung-ho during the native hunting competition. He really wanted to win SHAKKY as his prize, already being so greatly infatuated with her. And then there's another comment which I found extremely entertaining. What if SHAKKY is not only the mother of the twin boys, but she's also the mother of Mihawk? Now this lines up with another fan theory that I know has existed for some time, the idea that Mihawk is the son of Rayleigh and SHAKKY. So then according to this comment, that would mean that Mihawk was born to Rayleigh and SHAKKY, whereas obviously Shanks and Shamrock were born to Garling. And according to one comment, that's also the reason why she came to Hachinosu in the first place. She fled Amazon Lily knowing that she can't have a boy there. When we see her in chapter 1157, retiring from the Kuja Pirates and settling down at Pirate Island, this is because she knew that she was pregnant, perhaps already knew that she had a baby boy, and she knew that a boy can't be born in Amazon Lily, or at least can't be raised there. And that boy whom she was pregnant with at the time was Mihawk, fathered by Silver's Rayleigh. Except then she was stolen from Hachinosu, taken by Figureland Garling, forced to have another set of boys, and then following the God Valley incident, Shanks was taken by Roger's crew, SHAKKY was supposedly saved given that we know she ended up marrying Rayleigh, whereas Mihawk was left behind, and according to this comment, that's where he was trained as a God's Knight. And I think that last point leans into another fan theory. I'm not too deeply aware of it, but I think there have been a few claims that Mihawk is also a former God's Knight member, which is all super fascinating because according to this theory, that would mean that in a cruel twist of fate, Shanks and Mihawk are actually half-brothers who have grown to have fierce rivalry, living the life that the other one should have lived. You know, in Shanks' case, he grew up as a pirate despite his celestial dragon lineage, whereas Mihawk, despite being born to two legendary pirates, he was trained and raised to be a God's Knight member. And like I said, this has been extremely entertaining to think about. But I do have to put my logic hat on, and I think it would be remiss of me not to point out a few counter-arguments. Let's start with the Mihawk idea. I think Rayleigh seemed way too chill if his son and lover was really captured at God Valley. We see in chapter 1096 that he is the most level-headed out of the Roger Pirates. But there is obviously a counter argument to that. It could be that Rayleigh didn't actually know that SHAKKY was pregnant at the time. Even still though, I would say that if SHAKKY was already his lover by this point, he does still seem a little too calm. And then when it comes to the Shanks portion of the theory, look, I think it is still pretty crazy, but maybe a little bit more plausible. The only thing is that we don't know when SHAKKY was taken from Hachinosu. But because we know that Shanks was already a 1-year-old by the time of God Valley, for this theory to make sense, it would mean that SHAKKY needed to have been kidnapped at least 21 months before the God Valley incident, almost 2 years. And a part of me feels like that Rox is the type of guy that would have gone after SHAKKY straight away. But then again, he might not have known where she was taken to. Maybe the Rox pirates were searching for her all this time, but if they were only able to find out about SHAKKY's whereabouts thanks to Ginny, which we also know from chapter 1096 that her message out to the world only came out 2 weeks before the God Valley incident, it could make sense that no one knew where SHAKKY was, but as soon as as the Rocks pirates found out, they made a beeline for God Valley. Now, I have also seen another counter argument that this theory doesn't make sense because Shamrock and Shanks' hair is red, whereas Garling is blonde and Shakky's hair is black. And look, that is a valid point, but I also think there are multiple workarounds that Oda could weave in for this theory to still work. You know, Shakky's hair might not have always been black, maybe it just turned black as she aged, or maybe Garling's hair wasn't always yellow. It also could be a situation where either Garling or Shakky's parents did have red hair and the red hair genes just skipped a generation, or maybe even that Shakkyi was just under a lot of stress during her pregnancy. Maybe she was even forced to undergo some sort of experimentation like Ginny was under the hands of Saint Saturn, and that's what resulted in Shanks' hair becoming red. Look, all I mean is that the possibilities are endless. On the other hand, I do quite agree with some of these observations that Shakkyi alone being the crown jewel doesn't quite explain the death match between Roger and Rocks. Or I think even more so than that, I don't think it quite explains why Garp would team up with Roger to defeat Rocks. We've seen from these flashbacks that Garp really considered Roger his #1 nemesis, and saving Shakkyi alone, whom he didn't really seem that interested in, that doesn't quite explain why they would team up together. So I do definitely think there is a lot more to this story of God Valley than just Shakkyi, but I don't think that invalidates this idea that Shakkyi could be Shanks' mum, or even that Shakkyi was really the catalyst, the cause for the God Valley incident. You know, it could still be true that the initial conflict, the initial spark that brought together Roger and Rocks and their respective crews to God Valley was to save Shakkyi, but then there were further issues, a further conflict arose, and that's what resulted in Garp and Roger teaming up and the eventual showdown against Rocks Beck. And then another thing that I wanted to address was that there were quite a few people who seemed to be quite disappointed with this idea that Shakkyi may have been the initial catalyst for God Valley, and I have to say that honestly surprises me. I get that Oda has made this quite comical and quite goofy for an event that seemed so hyped up and quite seemingly serious up to this point, but then again, One Piece is often exactly goofy and comical and straight up ridiculous. And at the same time, I agree with the comments that have pointed out that this isn't exactly new. Not only in the sense that Oda has likely been inspired by the story of Helen of Troy, a real life myth, which is a very Oda thing to do, which I have also pointed out in my last video, but then also think about Luffy starting that massive conflict at Enies Lobby all to save Robin. Is that really that much different from the Rocks pirates trying to save Shakkyi at God Valley, or even Whitebeard trying to save Ace at Marineford? I mean, if you take the simping out of it, at the end of the day, it's all simply about protecting your loved one. And I get that in Robin and Ace's case, it's about saving someone who is your nakama, your crewmate, but regardless of whether Shakkyi was officially in the Rocks Pirates crew or not, she set up home at Hachinosu. The idol of the world chose the base of Pirate Island as her home. She welcomed them into her bar, treated them like friends, and then we also see in chapter 1157 that she explicitly asked for their protection, which then I think this means even goes to the Rocks Pirates' honor, their honor as fierce pirates. So I think the Rocks Pirates were really just doing what any good friend would do. I mean, yes, there is obviously a high level of comedy because we know that they were also very heavily motivated by their attraction to her, but I think deeper than that, when you strip away all of that, the world government stole someone that was important to them, so it's only right that they would seek to retrieve her and get her back. I mean, if you think about it, that's actually really the very first message that Oda shared with us in the very first chapter. Shanks explicitly says to Higuma, "You can laugh at me, you can even throw a drink at me, but you can't mess with my friend." So I think the whole Shakkyi situation is actually very true to One Piece, and hopefully thinking about it that way will alleviate some of your disappointment if you really are so disappointed, because I have to say, I personally love Oda's twist on God Valley. And then this also got me thinking, if Oda twists God Valley like this, if he twisted Gear 5th into Luffy having Looney Tunes cartoon powers, what the hell is the One Piece going to be? I can't wait because I think it must be something really absolutely ridiculous, absolutely hilarious, something that made the Roger Pirates, the Pirate King, genuinely laugh, actually crack up at the hilarity, the absurdity, just as we're laughing now about the legendary battle of the Simps. So I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on what that hilarious One Piece is going to be, so make sure to leave a comment below. And then another thought, another connection that I made whilst rereading all of this was that not only has Oda likely been influenced by the Trojan War, but if it is true that Shakkyi really is Shanks' Kaido's mother, another story that I think really works is the story of Moses. So you may already be familiar with the biblical story of Moses because it's also something that I think inspired Oda in the story of Ace and Rouge. But basically the biblical story goes to say that the Pharaoh of Egypt once decreed that all Hebrew baby boys should be killed. So his mother initially hid him for 3 months, and then when she could hide him no longer, placed him in a basket made of papyrus, leaving him among the reeds of the Nile River. And then this baby boy was eventually found by the Pharaoh's daughter, who adopted Moses, hired his mother as his nurse, and so Moses grew up as a prince of Egypt, eventually leading all the Jewish slaves out of Egypt and fulfilling God's plan. And ever since we found out that Shanks was found in this treasure chest by the Roger Pirates, I've always thought that there is an element of Moses' story in play, and I've been reminded of it again reading everyone's comments that Shanks might be Shakky's son, because that might have been exactly what happened at God Valley. Anyways, I can't believe that I promised to share my thoughts on the rest of chapter 1157, and I spent all this time still talking about Goon Valley, but everyone left such interesting comments that I couldn't not discuss them. In terms of my other thoughts, let's go through them one by one, but before we do, please subscribe to the channel to join the Joy Fleet. We are so close to 100,000 subscribers, and we'd love to have you on board. I promise in return we will have a lot of fun together because all we do is discuss One Piece, and who doesn't want that? Okay, starting from the top. The Temple of International Philanthropy Federation. I love that Oda just continues to keep enriching his world. So this institution is very soon revealed to be a front, a corrupt temple that is pretending to be a charitable foundation even though it's stealing all the money for itself. But what I love is that witnessing the Rocks pirates attack this foundation, loot the Federation, it gives Rocks a much more Robin Hood vibe. I think this really further portrays that Rocks is not just a straight up bad guy. He is very much a morally grey character, and that's obviously much more in line with One Piece overall, which is all about nuance. But I think this is also going to make the rest of his story arc, his character arc, that much more interesting. Rocks is such a likable character, and so when we finally get to his death, or his so-called death, I think it's going to make things so much more complex. Oda also uses this moment to deepen some of the character relationships. A classic Rocks Pirates moment is when SHAKKY tries to kill his own crewmates, which perfectly lines up with what we already know about the Rocks Pirates as not being a harmonious crew. But then this scene also allows us to learn that Whitebeard already had his devil fruit by then. We even see that he uses the same attack that we saw in Marineford in chapter 564. So I actually thought that we might be seeing Whitebeard gain the Gura Gura no Mi as one of the prizes being offered up at God Valley, but now that we know that that's not the case, I do have to wonder if he already had this powerful ability, if he was already this strong, had such an overpowered ability, how did Rocks end up being defeated at God Valley? I have to say that I do really like that Whitebeard in particular, his power got some focus here. I think that in a Rocks-centered flashback, this is Oda's way of making clear that Whitebeard wasn't just another subordinate, if you can even call him that. You know, this is the man that would one day be known as the strongest. And speaking of strongest title holders, it's wild to see Whitebeard and Kaido have a semi-amicable moment. And for me, I think this scene recontextualizes Marineford a bit. I mean, sure, we know that Kaido is said to have wanted to challenge Whitebeard, but my headcanon now is that Kaido was going there to take down Whitebeard himself because he would rather that than let the Marines do it. And maybe, just maybe, he would have even actually helped Whitebeard, helped his former crewmate if he had made it in time or if he hadn't been stopped by Shanks. At the least, I think it's very clear that Kaido always looked up to Whitebeard, recognized him as being the strongest, and it's crazy to think about because we know that Kaido would become the man that would later kill Whitebeard's brother Odin. And then the war to liberate Wano would also be the war that would be the end for Izzo, one of Whitebeard's sons. But before all of that, once upon a time, Whitebeard and Kaido were almost like brothers, almost, and I guess if only for a moment. The dialogue here is also very interesting. Kaido admits that he's jealous of Whitebeard for having a devil fruit, and Whitebeard warns him to choose wisely because you have one devil fruit that stays with you for life. And obviously we know that Kaido would eventually end up with a mythical Zoan, the Ua Ua no Mi, Model Seiryu, one of the God Valley treasures. But now I can't help but see Blackbeard stealing Whitebeard's devil fruit as almost a dark callback or a foreshadowing to this moment. This segment also sees Silver Axe being hit that triggers more infighting with Shiki, and that might be just for comedic effect or to further set up the rivalry, which might get delved upon deeper at some other point. But the fact that amongst all of this, the fact that Whitebeard and Kaido remain totally unfazed, just casually chatting, I think it does really present them as a cut above the rest, even with someone like Silver's Axe who had his own very special introduction in the last chapter. But what really intrigued me in relation to Silver's Axe is Whitebeard's dialogue, his comment when he wonders whether someone tipped off the world government. You know, we see Whitebeard speculate on whether there is a rat, a mole, and immediately my head goes to Silver's Axe because I have already theorized that he may be a marine's plant. So then this chapter only furthers my belief that Silver's Axe might be the mole, he might actually be a marine, maybe even a part of Sword, as some others have pointed out to me, and he's the one that has been leaking the Rocks Pirates activities. He might have even been the one that alerted them to the fact that SHAKKY was now at Hachinosu. In any case, as the Marines attack, the narrator gives us a rundown of the Rocks Pirates activities in the past 2 years since they formed, and that is crazy when you think about it. This crew, with all of their infighting, their massive egos, they lasted at least 2 years, even 4 years according to chapter 1156. And not only that, they have been a menace. They have actually been operating effectively together. I think this glazing is absolutely wild. In an era where the Pirate King or the future Pirate King was active, this would still have had to have been called the Rocks era. And then knowing that makes me even more curious about the relationship between Garp and Roger, because if Roger wasn't even the biggest fish to fry at that time, what made him of such interest to Garp? Why was Garp so fixated on Roger as opposed to someone like Rocks? And so to me, this seems like their relationship, their rivalry, was on a much more deeper personal level, so I really can't wait to explore that eventually. And then there is of course the whole Harold and Rocks relationship, which we also see in this chapter. I've said it before, but I think this friendship is so freaking cute. Again, Rocks is just such a likable character. Because in chapter 1157, we see that the political tension between King Harold and the world government reaches almost the breaking point. Over at the Marine headquarters, Garp is all for welcoming Elbaf. He wants them to become a world government affiliated nation so that they can boost more giant Marine numbers, but Kong shuts him down, saying that only the world government can make that call. And then comes the bombshell at the end of the chapter. The 5 elders send Harold a direct offer. Elbaf can join the world government, but only if he kills Rocks. And from Loki's perspective, which at the end of the day, this flashback is supposed to be Loki's flashback, this is the nightmare scenario. This was the one that was teased from quite early on in the Elbaf arc. We know that Loki idolized Rocks as the one man who stood up against to the entire world. And for a kid like Loki, we know that that was a very attractive idea as a young boy who felt rejected by the whole world. And so now we are seeing what made Loki hate the world government so much, something that we've known from the early Elbaf chapters. And we know that this even relates to the complaint that he had against his father, especially if Harold followed through with their demands, somehow became involved at God Valley, killed the man that Loki reveres the most, although I do have to say that I find that quite unlikely, because this is the part where things get murky. We know that Rocks was defeated and presumably killed at the God Valley incident, supposedly at the hands of Garp and Roger, who were working together. But we don't know, was Harold there? Could Harold also have been there present at God Valley? Then when we go back to chapter 1152, looking at Loki's comments, even though it does seem like Loki is connecting Harold to Rocks' death, I don't get the sense that Harold was actually directly involved. To me, I actually interpret Loki to just dislike the fact that his father is now working with the world government, who were the ones responsible for Rocks' death. I don't think he is directly blaming Harold for Rocks' death. Plus, we also know that despite his rough exterior, Loki actually cares and loves his father quite a lot. I think that much is pretty clear from his interactions with Harold. And then we also know that Rocks had a deep fondness for Harold. And you know, who's to say that that feeling wasn't mutual? In this chapter, we even see Ida recognize that Harold actually does consider Rocks a friend by this point, no matter how much he refuses to join him as part of his crew or won't even let him in the castle. I think there is a personal connection and personal fondness there, even though he won't accept him fully for very political reasons. So I actually think that Harold didn't kill Rox, which is why I want to pose an entirely different possibility. What if Rox survived God Valley and fled to Elbaf instead? And this is what's going to further complicate that political intrigue going on between Elbaf and the world government. Could be the reason why world government has decided to attack Elbaf instead, connecting the flashback to the events that we're seeing in real time. Meaning in that case, the Elbaf arc isn't also just a trip down history. It's not an arc that's just supposed to give us flashbacks and lore. It might even be still the hiding place of one of the most significant characters in the story. Imagine if Rox is actually alive right now, hiding in Elbaf, and he steps out at this critical moment to confront Imu in Gunko's body. That could even be how he fulfills his threat, his promise from the flower room scene, when he promised Imu that he'll be back. And look, I have discussed my theory that Rox is alive in another video, so I recommend you to check that out. But for now, another detail that really caught my eye, the Gorosei silhouettes look a little different here. Specifically, the far one on the left, that doesn't seem to match Jupiter, and that makes me think that we actually might be seeing an entirely different member here, because we do know that the Gorosei can be replaced. We saw that with Garling replacing Saint Saturn, and so there may have been another swap, relatively recently. And if this figure that we see in this silhouette isn't Saint Jupiter, because Saint Jupiter joined the ranks a little later, much more recently, that could also explain why he's the youngest looking out of all the Gorosei. Or maybe the Gorosei aren't technically immortal, but they age very, very slowly. And so this silhouette is of Jupiter's form when he is actually much younger, and then that would also be a sort of confirmation that Jupiter is the youngest out of all the Gorosei. But then of course we also have to remember that silhouette piece is often unreliable. Anyways, I know I've been saying this a lot, especially very recently, but Oda just keeps serving banger after banger. This chapter 1157, had so much to love. Even the little things of seeing all these legendary marines, seeing Garp, Sengoku, and Suru in their younger Vice Admiral days, or just the sheer comedy of Rox being at the beck and call of a smoking woman. All of these little moments sprout new ideas, new theories, like the interaction, the conversation between Whitebeard and Stussy in this chapter really has me feeling that Weevil is really not Whitebeard's son. Oh, and how can I forget the baby Katakuri, Daifuku, and Oven? I seriously need these as little plushie dolls. But look, those are some of my immediate thoughts on chapter 1157. If I've missed anything, let me know by leaving a comment below, or just share your thoughts in general, because there is always plenty more to say. And don't worry about the chapter break that's coming our way, because I will continue discussing our favorite series. So on that note, make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss out on any future One Piece discussions. You can also like and share the video. You can even become a channel member or a Patreon member to support the channel further, like these wonderful people. But as always, thank you so much for listening to another one of my crazy ramblings. This is JoyGirl, and I'll see you again soon.